Welcome to, I don't even remember what number this is, of the Wishart Municipal Group weekly webinar. We certainly, Peggy helps me with number 7. Thank you very much. And I see that we can actually see Mary Lynn's face now. That's awesome. So yeah, welcome everybody. And we're glad that you were able to join us again. We have a big agenda, so we're going to get started shortly, but I want to encourage people to ask questions using the chat feature, and we'll try to get to those. Where there are specific questions that require research, then we'll probably touch base with you afterwards to see how you'd like us to help you with that, but we're certainly happy to do that. We don't have a poll for you today, but at the bottom of the page there are reactions that you can use. So we've set this up specifically. We had some discussions with the folks at Zoom, and we've heard some feedback about our webinar, and so you get to use the thumbs up or clapping to either rate the webinar today as good or very good. So as we're going to proceed, I suppose I should introduce myself for anybody who hasn't met us yet. I'm Paul Cassan from Wishart Law Firm. I've been practicing municipal law for 22 years. With me today is Nuala Kenny. She's a certified specialist in municipal law with respect to governance and also with respect to planning and development. She used to be the solicitor for Sault Ste. Marie for over 20 years until we stole her. Beside her, but speed away, is Tim Harmer from our office. He does a lot of research and drafting and contract review. You've probably dealt with him. Mia Rella is with us. She has more than 3 years experience prosecuting provincial offenses for municipalities all over the province. And we also have Lacey Ligori, who is paralegal with us. And two of our collection of Brittany's, Brittany Hodgkinson is running the webinar today as our host, and Brittany Valley is an assistant who does a lot of labor and employment work with me for municipalities. And I'll tell you, I just had the opportunity this week to spend 4 days in online arbitration, which is the way that things are going to be proceeding in the future. And certainly I'm happy to help any of you who are becoming involved in arbitrations or hearings that are going to be done online, with respect to best practices for that and how to prepare for it, and certainly some tips that I've got for that. So if anybody is going down that road, a lot of unions are starting to require that, and we're even looking at online negotiation of collective agreements. So I'm happy to help out with that if anybody needs it. And so with that, today what we're going to talk about, Tim's going to give us a legislative update. The province has been busy over the past week changing and updating legislation, so he's going to provide some information about that. I'm going to talk to you about some strategies for dealing with what I've called Iratepayers, and they might be called Ratepayers as well. Nuala is going to talk about labor and employment issues with respect to developing return to work plans. And then Mia is going to provide us with some reminders and advice about the reopening that we're seeing on the horizon. There is going to be a lot of work for municipalities to open safely. We're actually developing a program so that you can be COVID safety certified when you open up. We're looking at providing that training to municipalities and to the employees and staff of municipalities. So that's coming up. Watch for that. And with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to Tim, and he'll tell us about Mr. Ford's legislative updates and where the province is going. Over to you, Tim.
Yeah, so thanks, Paul, and thanks. Just before I get started, thanks everyone for joining us again. It's I've been seeing a lot of familiar faces on the session today, so that's really great to see. And obviously this week we've got we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel finally, which is great news. The Ontario government on May 14th. The Premier did there was a press release that came out of the Premier's office that talked about the types of organizations that can reopen. Some of them are very relevant to municipalities, and so I wanted to go through that list. It's really divided into two sections essentially, and there are businesses that can open as of May 16th. And then there are others that can open as of May 19th. And so I'll go through. I've got the lists of those. What I'd like to do, guys, is take everyone through the high points of those two lists, and then, of course, if there are any questions, hopefully I can get to those as well. If they're ones that can be answered very quickly, of course. So as of 12:01 a.m. on the 16th of May, golf courses, the Premier's announced that golf courses are going to be able to reopen, only for washrooms, and open only for washrooms, and restaurants will open only for takeout. When I say golf courses will be able to open, I should say that it's only the golf courses themselves will be able to open. It's only the clubhouses that will still be closed, with the exception of the washroom facilities. Marinas are going to be allowed to reopen as of May 16th as well. I know we've talked a lot about marinas. Marinas are going to be allowed to open for recreational use as of May 16th. So there will no longer be that concern that we talked about with respect to marinas only opening to allow for individuals to access their own private residence. Private parks are going to be able to reopen, and campgrounds as well. This is May 16th still, to enable preparation for the new season. Businesses that board animals, stables, etc., are going to be able to allow visitors to visit to basically care for, or if they're stable, to be able to ride their horses. So those types of businesses are going to be able to open on May 16th. Then really the full stage one list of reopening really comes on May 19th. And so all construction is going to be able to resume with an essential workplace limits lifted. So that's something that I think is relevant for a lot of municipalities, although we talked about some of the issues around municipal infrastructure at the last webinar, but now we're seeing all those restrictions going to be lifted as of May 19th. I'm going through the list. There are, and this may be relevant for some municipalities, retail operations are going to be able to reopen. No indoor malls. They must have a street front entrance and be able to do curbside delivery. They can open in-store by appointment or by limiting the number of persons in the store to respect the social distancing guidelines. Only fitting rooms with doors. There's some interesting things around that. One of the main things that I wanted to talk about for reopenings are some of the recreational amenities that are going to be reopening. I mentioned marinas as of May 16th. I did want to mention public pools are going to remain closed. They're not on the list of things to reopen. Actually, the government has specifically said that they're going to remain closed. Perhaps more relevant for some municipalities, outdoor recreational sports centers are going to be able to reopen if they're only those that don't involve team sports. So no clubhouse, no change rooms, washrooms, and emergency aid only. Though some of those involve, we can think of, the government's given the example of tennis courts will be able to open, cycling tracks, horse riding facilities. We talked about stables, but the riding facilities themselves are going to be able to open. Rod and gun clubs, and indoor rod and gun clubs are going to be able to reopen as well. Amateur sports activities are going to be able to resume, as long as they're involving their individual / single competitor events. So the kind of things that this includes indoor and outdoor non-team sports competitions that can be played with physical distancing measures. I mentioned public pools are going to be closed, but water sports on lakes and outdoor bodies of water are going to be permitted. So I mentioned about tennis courts reopening. Other racket sports, ping pong and badminton, are going to be allowed to be played. Animal-related sports such as dog racing and horse racing. Other sports such as track and field, motorcycle racing, figure skating, climbing, rock climbing, and gymnastics are going to be allowed. So the high contact sports aren't going to be allowed, like racquetball, martial arts, etc. So there are going to be some limited exceptions to get people back in some of the sporting fields and tennis courts that municipalities maintain. That's from my perspective. That's really, I think, the list that's most relevant to municipalities. And I should say that that one of the things that those businesses are going to have to do. The government has published, I think they're up to 90 different guidelines now, and so there are guidelines. For example, one of the relevant guidelines that I'd mention is there's a guideline for recreational and parks, recreational facilities and parks that municipalities may want to review, because all of these openings that I talked about are subject to compliance with the health and safety guidelines that the government has put online. And so, as I say, there are, I believe, up to 90 now different guidelines. So I'd encourage you to Google and Google those, review them, and review them in particular with respect to those types of facilities that you have in your municipality that you maintain. As I say, I know that the government does have a separate one for parks and recreation, and it's both on the employer side and the employee side. There are separate guidelines that the government's developed for each. So I'd encourage you to read through those. And if you have any questions about the openings that could have, or the types of sports that can be played on your using your facilities, etc., I'd be more than happy to help walk you through that in more detail, for sure. That's the big legislative update for this week, which, as I say, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and I know we're all looking forward to resuming work at the office, and Nuala is going to talk about that reopening and how that's going to take place. One thing I would just mention really quickly, I know I've talked about cybersecurity concerns before. I've been reading that, especially as people transition back to work, we're going to be seeing potentially more types of cyber attacks being targeted. These are probably going to be phishing type emails or spoof emails from colleagues. One of the things that hackers have been doing very successfully is going on sort of spoofing from a target and making them look like they may be coming from a colleague when they're not. Yes, talk cyber, and there's some cases about how that will. Sometimes cyber insurance won't cut if you are duped by if say money's transferred as a result of an error rather than the device itself being hacked. It's itself that does it. So so that's something to consider, and we do have some training packages available for cybersecurity specifically, and some policies that I've talked about before that can perhaps go a long way to supporting your due diligence in that respect if you do get an attack like that in your municipality. Do have a question about skate and bike parks. The government actually hasn't specifically specifically said about skate and bike parks. That wasn't mentioned specifically in the press release or the list of stage 1 openings. I suppose the answer though is that provided if these are, and I'm going to go back to just very quickly, and I know we're pressed for time today, so I may not be able to give a full answer to this question, but I will say skate and bike parks would likely fall into the outdoor recreational sports centers for sports not played in teams. And so, but that being said, of course, I haven't been to a skate park myself in some time, and so obviously the concern there would be multiple people using the skate park. It wouldn't necessarily be like a tennis court where you'd have one person on each side. You could have potentially multiple people. So I would be cautious I'd be cautious in saying skate parks could reopen. I think they could, provided that social distancing guidelines were maintained, such that there were only one person using the actually skateboarding, for example, at a time in a particular area. There is a link to, I believe there is a link to, I can provide that. I think we can provide that link. I'll just defer to Brittany. There's a question, can you provide the link to the provincial/recreational opening guidelines? We can do that, I believe, Brittany, after the webinar, maybe through an email. And then there's a last question about how to handle washroom facilities indoor and outdoor. And that may actually be a good time for me to transition to Nuala, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the reopening ideas and how to properly care for your facilities, both of course, this would apply perhaps to washrooms as well as office space, etc. So without further ado, I'll turn that over to Nuala, and if there are other questions, please keep them going, and we'll answer them as we can.
I think there is going to be further ado, because I think next up is Paul. Are you going to speak about Iratepayers? And I will definitely swing back to the washroom facilities in my session.
I jumped the gun, everyone. Sorry about that. I'll turn it back over to Paul now.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about Iratepayers, and this is maybe more severe during the COVID time period, but it's a problem that that municipalities have to deal with throughout their governance cycle. And so last time I was talking about a number of policies that we have put in place with our municipal clients, dealing with how to deal with difficult ratepayers who either ask repeated questions already been answered, or ask multiple questions that effectively dominate either council or staff's time. And so I have spoken already about council looking at their level of service bylaw during the COVID period to ensure that the focus of staff is on responding to the emergency and health and safety of individuals. I suppose what I mean by that is if you have a particular person whose job is to field questions from municipalities, but that person is working on a rotating schedule, you don't necessarily want to bring that person in every time somebody asks a question. And so the level of service bylaw is something that council may want to have a look at, and certainly ask staff if there are issues with the level of service bylaw that need to be tuned during the COVID emergency. Keep in mind, of course, bylaws and policies like the level of service bylaw belong to council. And so it is completely within your jurisdiction to change those, fit the times. And I would urge you to do that. Other policies that we have set up. One has a number of different names depending on the municipality, but it's an unreasonable conduct bylaw. Essentially what that does is it lays out a process for how to deal with, or how ratepayers who are behaving unreasonably are going to be dealt with. And the policy lists what council believes is unreasonable conduct and how that will be dealt with. And it often contains a spectrum of responses, from restricting ratepayers to talking to a specific person, to communicating in a particular manner, um, things like that, up to and including potentially trespass notices for ratepayers who are engaging in borderline workplace violence, where you have to protect council or staff under the Occupational and Safety Act. So we call that an unreasonable conduct bylaw. The other thing that goes hand in hand with that is a communications committee. So some municipalities have ratepayers who, regardless of the unreasonable conduct bylaw, refuse that guidance and continue to inundate staff with communications, which of course diverts them from the tasks that council has given to staff and can actually affect your budget. So the communications committee is a concept where after the unreasonable conduct is happening and continuing, council identifies a ratepayer or a group of ratepayers and says to them essentially, the way that you're now going to communicate with the municipality is that all of your communication is going to go to a committee of council. The committee is going to review all the communication and provide advice to council about what portion of the communication is going to be answered and how. And I've got municipalities where they're literally getting hundreds of emails from an individual ratepayer every 2 days. And so what's happening then is the committee of council reviews the communication and decides what municipal resources are going to be devoted to answering those questions so that you can keep the municipal operation running. And the other thing that goes hand in hand with that is the concept of a business continuity plan. I don't know if a lot of municipalities had a business continuity plan before COVID, but it's certainly something that council should be looking at during the emergency and then tuning as we come out of the emergency going forward on a planning basis. So the concept there is to set up systems so that you can continue to offer your essential municipal services when there is an event that impacts your workforce. Particularly, this is, well, it's important for all municipalities, but it's particularly important where you're a small municipality and have only 1 or 2 roads personnel, as an example. If they work together and one of them becomes exposed to COVID, and so both of them have to quarantine, you still have work that needs to be done. And so one of the ideas that I've suggested is that municipalities approach their neighbor and see if you can develop essentially like a mutual aid agreement for road services or waste management or things like that. So those are ideas for business continuity. Now, I'm happy to help any municipality with those policies if those, and we have talked about the idea of cost sharing, and we're happy to do that for municipalities. You can just reach out to us by email and we can help you with that. What I want to talk about today are strategies for council to deal with these people before you get into the more difficult situations. And so there are a number of strategies that council can use and should be aware of, both during this emergency and generally. And the first one is that it is inevitable that you will have a contingent of your ratepayers who don't like any decision that you make. Now, what I mean by that is 2 parts. Certainly, We've heard of the acronym of a CAVE, or a citizen against virtually everything. We do have some of those ratepayers in our municipality. It's going to complain about everything that you do. Ultimately, though, depending on the decision that's being considered by council, you will have ratepayers who don't like the decision the council is making. That's the name of the game. That's why we have a council of multiple people making decisions on behalf of the municipality. And so the first strategy is for council to be aware, and for staff to remind council that no matter what issue we're considering, there will be ratepayers who don't like it and who will speak out against it. And that's the nature of the game. So if we go into any and every decision knowing that that's going to happen, it will be much less upsetting when it does happen, because we already know that it will happen. And that's normal. And one of the things that I like councils to do is keep an eye on the population number of their municipality and the number of people who are speaking out against a particular decision that you're making. So if you have a municipality of 300 people and you've got 5 people who are speaking out against your decision, that means there's 295 people that aren't sufficiently opposed to it to come to the table. So maybe you're doing a really good job there. So that's the first idea. The next idea goes hand in hand with that, and that is the idea that a lot of issues that we have in municipalities repeat, or they're foreseeable. So what I mean by that is, if you're in a low-lying municipality, you know that there's going to be flooding in certain areas. You know that that's going to happen around spring breakup. And so council can develop a calendar for when these events that cause a lot of social disruption are likely to happen, and can start messaging about how council is going to deal with it a few months ahead or a few weeks ahead of the event, so that it's not, it shows that council is aware of it, that they're providing good leadership, and that they have a plan to deal with it. And then when the event happens, council looks like, yeah, we're on top of this. We have the plan for flooding. We've got the sandbags already. We've got the sand. You know where the depots are, and you can do that. That's one example. Another example is, bears coming out of hibernation. So that happens, and put a program in your newsletter to say, remember to keep your garbage locked up, keep your barbecue clean, so that you can deal with issues that cause a lot of involvement and upset to the public in it. Now, when always going to be controversial. I've said this freely to councils to slow down. I know that there is a tendency and a desire on behalf of council to make a decision quickly, to make a project proceed quickly. But if you slow down and you plan for the project, particularly if it's a large project, and you lay out a number of steps that are going to happen before the decision is implemented, and you give opportunities for ratepayers to be involved in the decision on an ongoing basis, and you're to build up a fair bit of knowledge and understanding among the group that is interested. And you're also going to be in a position where, when people are upset that the project is now proceeding next door to them, and they come to council and say, oh my God, there's a construction project going on next to me, you can say as council, yes, there is. And we've been advertising that for 6 months. We've had 4 different meetings. And here you can go and talk to some of the people that were attending the meeting. The next idea with respect to this strategy is it's really smart for council when they're thinking about a decision that's going to be controversial and you're going to have uh, opposition to it, to prepare an inventory of community assets to deal with the issue. And what I mean by that is if you're looking at putting in a quarry as an example, you know that there will be opposition to that. And so in advance of the decision coming to council, in advance of all those issues, you should identify people in the community who have experience with aggregates, who have experience with trucking, who have experience with road repair, and particularly people in your community who are advocates for positions like that, and essentially recruit them or have them involved in the process so that you ensure that they come to the information meetings, so that council has allies in the community who can help spread the vision of council, if you will, so that it's not only council, but you develop a community engagement and a community messaging with these people who can help to support council's vision. So another similar idea, and this is kind of a social media issue, because councils, in the first point, you will get opposition on Facebook and on chats online, things like that. So if you set up your system so that you actually have a complaint process in your web page or in your Facebook page, if the municipality operates one of those, with a form that people fill out to indicate what their complaint is, and that complaint then gets into a complaint or a feedback policy process, then one of the effective tools for dealing with negative comments on Facebook or on your website or whatever is to have somebody from the municipality wade in after a few negative comments, not to respond to every negative comment, because what that does is it encourages negative commenting behavior by giving attention to those people. But if there are a number of negative comments that you're starting to see on your Facebook page, for example, about your tree or about your potholes on the road or something like that, then council could designate a councillor who's particularly good at messaging on Facebook to say, okay, but we have this complaint process in place. The form is on the website, so feel free to go and fill that out, and staff will look at what the appropriate response is. Shows really good leadership on behalf of council, because you're not ignoring the situation. You're not reacting to every negative issue, but you do respond in accordance with your feedback policy or your complaint policy, and you channel that to a constructive process. What you're going to find, in my experience, is that not very many of the people who are commenting negatively are going to bother filing a complaint, because what they really want to do is comment negatively. They don't care about solving the problem. But the ones that do, you can demonstrate that you've accepted the complaint, you've had a look at it, and you've responded to it, which is very good leadership and good respect. And then the other thing that's appropriate for council to do is to develop policies around appropriate conduct on social media. So if you have a Facebook page, you have some rules for what sort of conduct will be acceptable and what sort not. can essentially do like a social media code of conduct. And you may want to add this to your code of conduct for counselors as well. And so some examples where you can have a look at this, the city of Guelph has a really interesting example of this, and it's less a prohibition, you're more an inspirational or a goal-oriented code to say, we want counselors to set a high bar to comment positively with respect to issues, to talk to council and ensure that they're speaking in line with council decisions on issues on the social media page. So those are a number of strategies that I have this week. I'm going to speak about this again because there are some more strategies if these don't work. But if you deal with these issues, I think that this will reduce the negativity, and it'll certainly reduce the stress of council, because the reality is that these sort of negative comments are coming. And so if we know that and have a plan to deal with it, I think that will help council moving forward. So in light of the time, I'm now going to hand this over to Nuala, who is going to talk about ideas about coming out of the emergency and what you need to do with your municipality and your workplace going forward. So Nuala, if you can help us out with that, please.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Again, thank you so much for joining us. It's a great indicator to us that you're safe and healthy, that you can join on these weekly webinars, and it really lifts our concerns knowing that all of you are doing so well enough anyways to attend the seminar. And also our really heartfelt thanks that you're taking your time to engage in this webinar. I know there's a host of them available to you, and it really means a great deal to us that you choose ours every Friday morning, and we hope that the content is helpful to you. Far and away, it's our favorite part of the week, and I can say without hesitation that for this group anyways, you guys hands down are our favorite clients, and it's our favorite type of law to practice. So it's delightful for us to do this. I want to speak specifically about the return to work, where we're being asked to return to work. And the way people have dealt with this pandemic, I think you've seen various reactions to it. You're going to see that again in return to work. And I just want to share with you, I was thinking about in preparation for my session, I was thinking, I have 3 children, 3 adult children now, and I want to share with you their 3 reactions to the pandemic. So my son is the youngest. He sees solely the commercial, political, and capitalist aspect of the pandemic, and is not averse to the notion of it being a conspiracy. My middle daughter thinks it's the 7th sign of the apocalypse, hasn't left her house since March 17th, and has become rather like Greta Garbo. My eldest daughter started a blog called Pandemic Positivity, which she begins every week with, "Hello, my pandemic peeps," and a great idea for positivity during the quarantine. That's in my house. Imagine across the province and in your community. So you're going to have various reactions to the return to work based on all of our personalities. And we're being asked to return to work, or will be very shortly, back to normal at a time when the virus is not cured, but contained. And we do not have a vaccine even yet, but we're being asked to return. So by all accounts, we've done a very good job. And I want to say in particular in Canada, it seems to me that we've done an extremely good job about containing the virus and lessening the strain on our healthcare system, but it is not cured and we do not have a vaccine. So there's going to be people that are, I would say legitimately, like my Greta Garbo daughter, terrified about the prospect of going back to work. And yet we are being required to, from an economic perspective, from a legislative perspective. So I'm hoping to provide some insight as to how we can deal with that. Largely, I'm going to be speaking about the worst case scenarios, which would be work refusals. And we're already seeing that in terms of, I don't know if you happen to follow some TTC workers. There was a group of TTC workers that refused to work on transit in Toronto, saying that they didn't think it was adequately cleaned. There was also a group of auto workers that were concerned about secondary exposure. So that was an individual who thought he had, was exhibiting signs of symptoms of COVID and went home, and the workers were concerned about going back to work where he had been working. I will say parenthetically that both of those cases went to the Ministry of Labor as work refusals, and they were overturned. So that is to say that the ministry found the workplaces safe and adequate for the workers to return to work. You're also going to see really just a psychological panic or fear about return to work, so that people are saying it's nothing empirical, it's my own neuroses, it's my own anxiety that's preventing me from going back to work. So I heard one time that, and we really are in an era of information overload, and I heard one time years and years ago that at most conferences you take one or two things with you and the rest you forget. So if you take one or two things from my session, let one of them be this: it is safety first and science second. So you're going to hear, and I think we've already heard various views, for example, on face masks. Do they protect you? Do they protect others? Should they be worn when you're sick? Do they prevent sickness? Err on the side of safety, even if the science hasn't caught up yet. And even if science shows that it was an unnecessary precaution to take, err on the side of safety and let science catch up with you. The obligation to have the workplace safe for workers falls to the employer. You're required under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to take all reasonable precautions in the circumstances to make the workplace safe for workers. That means the workplace is safety, is safe, it means the equipment is safe, it means you have proper PPE for your workers, and you have proper instruction on use and maintenance of the PPE. A worker may refuse work if the worker has a reason to believe that the workplace or the equipment that the worker needs to use is likely to endanger them. A workplace refusal is a very serious state to take by a worker. It's not something that you can enter into lightly, and I think particularly in unionized environments, but in all work environments, I think workers accept that it is a very strong step to take. Of course, it doesn't apply to workers for whom danger is a part of their everyday activity. For example, police officers, or in this day and age, we're getting a new breed of hero, and that seems to be the healthcare workers, the nurses and doctors that are frontline workers. So if danger is part of your duties, then you cannot rely on that. But certainly your office workers, the arena workers, your canteen workers, your Board of Works people, danger is not generally considered part of their accepted duties. So if they are of the reasonable belief that it is not safe for them to work, they can refuse work. There's a protocol for work refusal, and the first is to bring it to the attention of the employer. If this happens, it's very important to engage in a fulsome conversation with the worker. If you're a unionized environment, ensure that the union is present for the discussion. I cannot stress enough, now I'm talking about health and safety, but I also say it when you have human rights complaints, accessibility complaints, really any sort of complaint in the workplace. If you can tailor a solution between yourself and the employee, you are a head and shoulders ahead of the game. You're going to have a solution that works, that the employee contributed to the solution, and its likelihood of success is much greater than if you have a third party or a court superimposing a solution. You've heard us say repeatedly throughout these webinars, now is the time for compassion and creativity. Take that, when you are looking at negotiating with your employee about what the best solution would be in this circumstance. We had a situation with the municipality when the pandemic first started about individuals that were working together in a vehicle, and they didn't want to be that close to one another in the vehicle. And we worked with the employer worked with the employee to come up with a solution where it was staggered, where they didn't necessarily have to be in the cab of a truck together. Never has been done before in that municipality. It's not the normal way that they conduct business or do their work, but it's a very different time. So really encouraging that creativity and compassion, because again, I'll go back to my Greta Garbo. She's not faking it. Her anxiety about going out in the community is very real and palpable, and you cannot reason with her about it. It is a real concern that she has about getting sick and about spreading the virus and about the rest of the community getting sick. So try not to be dismissive of people's individual anxieties. They're very, very real. If after the worker has approached the employer and said, I'm concerned about the safety of this piece of equipment or the workplace, I don't feel it's being sanitized frequently enough. And if you are unsuccessful in negotiating a solution, then the Ministry of Labor becomes involved and they conduct an investigation. The ministry can be contacted by the employee or the employer. During the time when the employee's situation is being investigated, the employee is to be paid and to be available at a site as close as possible to the workplace to participate in the investigation. So I'm going to give an example. If you had a truck driver who thinks the vehicle isn't sanitized properly and is anxious and uneasy returning to that workplace, you're unable to come up with a solution, you'll tell the truck driver, you'll need to work in this office space, or you'll need to be available in the dispatch room or something of that nature. You don't have to enter the vehicle, but you need to be here. MOL is coming and you need to be accessible so that they can put questions to you. Once the Ministry of Labor has made a decision, and very often what we're seeing with the ministry is that they're saying this is fixable. If it's not already fixed, it's fixable. So we're going to tell you, employer, you need to step up sanitation, or you need to have greater distance between the employees, or stagger when employees come in. Once that decision is made, the employee must return to work. If the employee fails to return to work, that is misconduct and is disciplinary. I heard a lawyer speaking on CBC about this issue, and he said, the number one thing we want to guard against is a lawsuit that impacts your organization and cripples it financially. Well, I disagree with that lawyer. That's not our number one concern. Our number one concern is we don't want people getting sick. And we don't want people getting fatally sick or infecting someone so that they become sick or fatally sick. Number two, we want to contain the virus. We don't want it to spread throughout the community. We don't want it to be in a situation where, although the medical community could respond, they're so heavily taxed with other patients, it leads to dire consequences. That's our number two concern. And our number three concern is we don't want to be sued and crippled financially. They're all very important, but far and away, the most important is the health and safety of our staff, of ourselves, of our families, and our guests to our facilities. As a municipality, there are steps you can already do to put in place to ensure that you have a safe workplace. Many of these we've discussed over and over again. I'm going to go through them briefly, because I think by now you're all sort of in the master class in terms of what you need to do to keep your workplace safe. But I think it bears repeating. If you're sick, don't come to work. Make sure that that is the climate in your municipality. It's not lip service. You don't need a doctor's note. It's sufficient for you to say you feel sick, you're not coming in. And lead by example. So I know we're talking to sort of the higher end in terms of the employee pyramid on these webinars, lead by example. If you're sick, don't go into work. Make sure your staff know it. If you have symptoms, stay home. Do the Health Ontario checklist to see if your symptoms warrant testing. Self-quarantine after travel or visiting someone who has been infected. Ensure the social distancing, and you can do that very readily. We're seeing it now. It's quite commonplace now in grocery stores and pharmacies where they have the social distancing markers. If your workplace will translate to that, put those markers down so that you have an idea. And keep in mind the hockey stick reference. It's a hockey stick away from one another. Lots of hand sanitization and hand washing stations available. Pepper your workplace with posters reminding people how to wash their hands quickly. I think when the pandemic started, you saw people very fastidiously washing their hands and fingers and fingernails, and now you see people doing a rinse and they're done. That's not sufficient. It's 20 seconds with soap and warm water and into the crevices even of your nail beds and between your fingers. Very, very important. Cough and sneeze etiquette. I just want to spend a second. You know, people are. This is how you cough. I think the kids call it the vampire cough. But really, the vampire cough and sneeze is not the first choice. The first choice is cough or sneeze into a tissue and throw that away immediately. That's number one. Then it's the vampire. Frequent cleaning, particularly the highly touched surfaces, doorknobs, computer keyboards, with some regularity. Have a cleaning, sanitization, and disinfectant. We talked about that in an earlier seminar. The protocol, and record keep. Anyone that's worked with Paul in any of his arbitrations or gone to any of his training sessions, if you haven't recorded it, it's as if it didn't happen. Sad to say, but in this very litigious world, that is the case. Record keeping. Even these seminars that you attended the seminar, and Paul has given me the thumbs up icon for the importance of record keeping. The test for whether or not a workplace is safe is an objective test. The inspector from Ministry of Labor is going to make the decision as to whether or not it is empirically safe to work. But don't make a mistake. The obligation falls to the employer. And once the decision is made, either by the employer or with the consent of the Ministry of Labor, then that's it. And the employee's options then are limited. Return to work or be subject to discipline. All the comments I have said today apply to both unionized and non-unionized environments. They apply equally. The difference being very often unionized environments have a little bit more access to Ministry of Labor. Sometimes they're a little bit more sophisticated in their experience and ability to present, or maybe know the protocol for a work refusal, but the obligation is the same. So I'm going to give a couple of best practices.
On that point, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Nuala, but that's a great point. And if you, if any of our clients online have a work refusal happen, feel free to reach out and we can kind of coach you through it, because they happen without notice, and a worker says, okay, I'm not doing this job because it's not safe. Call us. If you don't get a live when you call, get Brittany Hodgkinson on the phone. She'll find one of us to coach you through that process.
Thank you, Paul. Absolutely, and really good point. I'm getting cognizant of the time. I'm gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna give a couple of tips that I have. Remember at the beginning I said it's safety over science. Here's my other takeaway. If you remember nothing from what I said, safety over science. And the second thing is that what we're seeing over and over again, I think in the Sioux, our local Chamber of Commerce has printed some t-shirts that say something like, we're all in this together, or we can get through this together. Well, those aren't just words. That's not just lip service. It's vitally important right now. For some people, it's even fatally important that we do this together. So too, do you need to bring that mindset to the return to work for your workers. So when you're looking at return to work, engage them. lots and lots and lots of communication with the staff and with the union. If you have them on board, if you say, this is what we're doing in terms of safety protocol, these are the masks we're providing, we're going to do a special training session on mask and glove usage on Thursday for all the staff to watch. What do you think of that, union? What do you think of that, office staff? Do you have ideas? Bring that to them. Then you have, you're ahead of the game. You're not going in with an anticipated tug of war. Phase in the return to work. So if you can bring people back in stages, it's anybody that's been on a prolonged leave, or, you know, heck, anybody that's been away for 10 days, it's tough to come back to work 8:30 Monday morning. Maybe you want to start people coming back every other day, mornings, and stagger them back in. It's good for social distancing, and it's good for productivity, because you're going to get people coming back so they're not starting a cold engine in the middle of winter. They've had a warm-up period. Meet the safety obligations that you're going to say you're doing. So if you say that we're going to sanitize this off, and if you say people need to wear masks, you need to discipline if that's not happening. You need to monitor, and there needs to be a consequence for not meeting it. That has to be treated as heart attack seriously, because it is heart attack serious. And I already made the point, and Paul reiterated record keeping of all of the same. Happy to discuss any of this in greater detail with you, but I don't want to impinge on Mia's time, because I know she's an audience favorite, and she always has very optimistic tips. So back to Paul, and thanks a lot.
And quickly over to Mia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Paul. So I will be mindful of the time, and we'll kind of try and get through all my material and hit the important points as quickly as I can. So I just want to reiterate what we do when we feel like we're overwhelmed. And it's like, when the crisis first started, we were very overwhelmed. Now we've kind of, calmed down a bit. We're working our way through it, and then now Ford has made the announcement that we're going to start the different phases of reopening. So now we're all starting to feel overwhelmed again, because we're going into new territory. So just always remember, anytime you feel overwhelmed, always go back to those safe places. So you focus on two things: keeping everyone safe and healthy, keep up to date with your infection protection for on-site workers, keep your employees informed. And like I said before, if you have people that are still working on site, and then you have people that are working remotely, make sure everybody's getting the same information. So you want to be very mindful of that. And secondly, focus on managing the economic challenges and being prepared for recovery. So consistently be thinking ahead, and you want to ensure that when things are getting back to the new normal, that you can continue to deliver the services that you're currently delivering. Another thing I wanted to talk about was communication. Like I said, communication is key. Stay focused on the priorities, and try not to take too long with responses, and have a process established internally with respect to how you're going to field questions, especially now about return to work and things reopening. Develop a little process of who's going to address what type of questions and how you're going to do it. And again, positive language, super important. During this time and this crisis, I think we can all use this as a really good learning experience. So I've been touching on risk management the last few weeks, and I think now that Doug Ford has made the decision to embark on stage 1 of the reopening, this is really important. So this crisis is one that has left no one unaffected. It's just a matter of magnitude and how much it's affected your organization. So it's important during this time to never lose sight that solving a crisis and solving a problem are two different things. So when facing a crisis, again, it's important to have our priorities very clear. And like Nuala has said, health and safety is number 1. So it's important that that priority is clear. There's a lot of moving parts right now, and a lot of people as part of an organization that you need to understand how each will affect the other. So a positively managed crisis will positively impact employee morale. and demands for transparency right now are at an all-time high. So again, communication is really, really important. During a crisis, we can also take this time to find an opportunity. If we view a crisis as a peril, then we paralyze ourselves as a response. We freeze when we're in a panic, but if we approach the crisis as an opportunity, a lot of potential presents itself. So build the reputation of your municipality, and also develop a whole different understanding of your workplace and the people that it takes to make that organization successful. And another thing that's really important is building trust. So work to develop trust with your key stakeholders, because at some point in this crisis, we all will have a role on coming back together and reopening. I know Nuala touched on this briefly about reopening your workplace. So as we're heading into stage 1 of the reopening, this has kind of caused mixed feelings amongst everyone, because no one really knows what to expect. We went into this crisis not knowing what to expect, and then we kind of developed an understanding, and then now it's like we're heading into another area where we don't know what to expect. So in terms of the workplace, we have to be prepared. We've adjusted to working remotely, and now we need to turn around and kind of relearn working back in the office, which will eventually have to happen. So it's kind of important to start thinking about that now. With respect to a healthy workplace, I always find that checklists are very helpful. So it's something maybe that we can start thinking about now, developing checklists for the workplace, keeping track of local orders, whether it be emergency orders or things that the municipality has going on. Start thinking about personal protective equipment for the workplace, as well as people that are visiting the workplace. Social distancing guidelines, physical barriers between employees, things like cleaning common areas, cleaning the area in general, information retention, rotating schedules, and prepare for unique situations such as vulnerable workers, people who come back with positive tests, and refusal to perform certain assignments. So all of this that I've kind of mentioned in a checklist is something that we can certainly help each municipality with, and address different concerns that you may have with each of those areas that I've mentioned, or how to go about implementing all that in your workplace, which is going to definitely be coming in the next few months, few weeks. We don't even know that yet, but those are my helpful reminders for this week. It's 11:03, so I did okay for time, and I'll turn it back to Paul.
Thanks a lot, Mia. There was actually a question that I think a lot of municipalities are going to be interested in, and that's dealing with opening washrooms. And so I would like Nuala to touch on that before we end. I hope that people can stay, and that will be the last question for today. So Nuala, can you help us with public washrooms, please?
Yes, the CDC has issued what they're describing as a skeletal guideline for what you can do for reopening. And boy, it's skeletal. It's, first of all, it's hard to actually get your hands on the document, but you have to kind of wade through. But once you do, as I have, you'll be underwhelmed. It says, make sure workplaces are safe and clean. It doesn't give very much advice. And I think you're going to see that again and again and again. So for washrooms, the answer is there is no specific recommendation. If you are able to ensure regular cleaning, by that I mean every half hour, absolutely do so. I think that the likelihood of that happening for municipalities, given the financial constraints, is extremely low. If that's your situation, my recommendation is as follows. Number one, limit the number of outdoor washrooms that you are in fact opening. Number two, increase the amount of cleaning that you do. Once a day is not enough. Every half hour would be ideal, but if you cannot do that, then you at least want to do it 3 or 4 times a day. Ensure that there is soap and hand sanitizer available. If you can provide wipes or spray for the door handles and the toilet, that would be fantastic. We're getting into a phase, and you're going to see it with the reopening, where the government was taking care of us, the federal government was taking care of us and keeping us home, and then the provincial government was taking care of us and keeping us home, and the municipality was taking care of us, and now it's going to start buckling back, where more and more obligation is going to be on individuals. So you need to get that message across to say, this bathroom is cleaned 4 times daily. Please use hand sanitizer. Please ensure social distancing. Please call X number if bathroom is not up to your satisfaction. And again, takeaway, record keep. And I know particularly, like for example, in parks, very often you're going to have summer students doing it, or you're going to have works people, and they generally, in my experience, not to stereotype, but generally those people don't like doing record keeping. It's absolutely critical. And record keeping, like Paul will tell you, the more detailed the record, the better. But goodness, if you can even have them X a box that the bathroom was cleaned at 8:30, 12:30, 3:30, 7:30, fantastic. Just so that we have this ongoing record keeping. And that's what I have to say today. I hope, and we'll all hope, that CDC will give us some more guidance. But if not, then that's sort of the best practice that I'm recommending that be adopted. And you're seeing municipalities, for example, on the West Coast that have already opened. Vancouver's opened quite a few things. They're saying places like, for example, playgrounds, it's use at your own risk. We clean it this often, use at your own risk. So that's going to be kind of the thinking behind it.
Thanks, Nuala. One really important point that Nuala said there, and I want to make sure everybody caught it, is open the number of bathrooms that you can take care of. And the point to take away from that with respect to bathrooms is that. But that's true of all of the other facilities that the province is allowing to reopen. It's important to remember that they're not mandating that they reopen. And so if your municipality does not have the resources to make a facility safe, you're not required to open it. You're permitted, but this is something that council should certainly be involved in looking at. How can we reopen things safely? So just keep that in mind, that the municipal government is still the boss of these facilities. And even when the restrictions are off by the province, you may find that you don't have the human capital or the financial capital to just open all of those facilities that the province says you may. So again, we talked to Zoom, and we got it set up so you can say this was good or very good with the thumbs up or the clap. So we'd love to see some of that. And we're sorry for going 10 minutes overtime. I'm really happy to see that everybody stuck around, and we'll see you again next week. Please reach out if you need anything during the week, and we'll be there for you. Thank you so much for coming. Have a great long weekend.